Okay, guys, a very warm welcome to a Friday, the 17th of May, and today is our last session on the Loire Valley Week. So today we're going to be talking about all things Vouvray with Stefan from Fels, who's going to give us an overview of the producer Marc Brédif, who produce our by the bottle Vouvray on the Hotel de Van core list. So yeah, last session on Loire Valley today, and then obviously next week we bounce on into the big hitters that are Bordeaux. So without further ado, Stefan, I will hand over to you there. Thank you so much, Dee, for taking time to talk to us today, and please share away.
All right, thank you so much, Richard. Great to be here. Great that we see so many people on the Friday afternoon. So fantastic to see. Let's get sort of straight into it, I would say. And let's start off briefly with Marc Brédif. All right, hopefully everyone can see that. So first of all, my name is Stefan. I work for Fels. One of my colleagues is on the call as well, so I will need to behave at the same time, which is Ed, this wonderful young-looking gentleman with the glasses and the blue shirt down there. But I know we've got a question-answer session after that sort of 20-25-minute presentation, but feel free to ask anything after that. If you really can't hold back and you want to ask in between, I'm sure Ed will coordinate that.
Stefan,
but anyhow, let's get...
Stefan, do me a favor, just display settings and switch to presenter mode at the top. We're seeing the behind the scenes version as opposed to the presenter view. Just select display settings in the middle, and then just in the middle there, display settings at the top of the middle, sorry. And then it'll flip it to display settings. And then it'll flip it to presenter. You see what I mean? You see what I mean? The taskbar at the top.
I need to find it.
Just at the taskbar at the top of the screen, click display settings.
Oh, hang on. Yeah, there you go.
And switch. There we go. Swap presenter mode. There we go. Perfect. All good. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Fantastic. Yeah, no problems. No problems. Thanks for interrupting. It's good. Okay, let's get started with this. I'm actually quite honored to be the last one in Loire here. As you can hear, clearly I'm not French, but I'm going to try not to butcher all the French pronunciation out there. But I've been several times to the Loire, and I think it's a wonderful area. So first of all, thanks for being here. Second of all, thanks for listing Marc Brédif Vouvray. There's plenty of different styles these guys produce. We're going to focus on a few today, the one which you have, which is called the Classic, but I'll show you a few other things as well. As I'm a sommelier by trade, I'm not only going to talk about Loire and Vouvray and Marc Brédif, I'm going to maybe give you a few more other information, which hopefully will help you at Hotel de Van with your guests and how to deal with certain situations, and to give you a rough overview about the area and the region as well, so you can hopefully confidently speak to your wonderful guests about it. But let's get started with Marc Brédif, effectively founded in 1893. And if you go to the estate, you actually can still taste an 1893 if you would open one, because that's as far as the library actually goes back. So it's pretty rare to find this, because 1893 is a vintage which technically is a great vintage, but it's over 100 years old. So there are not many wines these days which can survive that long. A brief overview what we're going to cover today. So first of all, where are they based in the Loire Valley? So we're going to go into that detail. Then a couple of laws and regulations about Vouvray, and in particular Marc Brédif. The different styles which you find in Vouvray, because there's always a few surprises for people that they think, oh, it must be predominantly still white wine, but there's so much more to it. Then who in general is this wonderful person called Marc Brédif? A couple of viticulture and vinification philosophies behind that. So everything from the typical nose to tail of viticulture, anything from the work in the vineyard till really the wine is in the bottle. So we're going to cover a lot of aspects there. And in general, of course, the wine, which I hope that some of you have in front of you. If not, hopefully this presentation will help you the next time when you are at Hotel de Van opening one of those bottles. And last but not least, maybe the most important one, this should hopefully help sales ever so slightly if you know what to pair it with. So a couple of food and wine pairing options in the end. Okay. First things first, where is effectively Vouvray? And I put on a map here. So it's quite the area, Loire. I'm sure you've had a wonderful introduction, but the river itself is about 1,000 kilometers long, largest river in France, the longest river in France, I should say. And it's, there's a huge diversity of Loire appellations. Vouvray is quite unique for several different aspects, but just to point this out, and hopefully you can see this with the red arrow, where effectively Vouvray is located. So it's really quite in the center of the Loire. It's not in the central vineyards. The central vineyards are reserved for this wonderful appellation of Sancerre, Pouilly-Fumé, and so on, but really quite in the central part. The nearest town effectively is Tours, which is a wonderful town to visit as well if you're ever in that area. Now, if you can see the top right corner of the presentation, you can see roughly where this is as well in the Loire, so it can give you a bit of an idea. But if you want to drive here from the UK, quite simple, all the way to the channel. You cross, you come to Calais, and from Calais, give or take, it's anything between 2.5 to 3.5 hours drive, depending on your driving, depending on the French motorway. But it's pretty straightforward actually to get there. So it's well worth a weekend visit. It's a quite small appellation. Having said that, it is really the home turf of one variety, which is Chenin Blanc. Now, we can take a bit of a closer look at the appellation itself. So as I mentioned, Tours is a really, really famous town there. And you can see there's sort of 3 different rivers. The main one is the Loire River, but the Loire River itself has many little tributaries, which are sort of going into the Loire. And they play a massive impact on the climatic conditions there. It's very, very close to another appellation. You can see this sort of in the on the other side, the town which is written Amboise. Amboise is actually quite a famous town in the area of Touraine. So Touraine, Amboise is something which you see quite frequently. Now this area itself, there's a lot of Chenin Blanc planted, but there's quite a bit of Cap Franc as well in other appellations. Vouvray is unique in that sense. It's pretty much based on one variety, which is Chenin Blanc. Okay, a brief history about the appellation, so that hopefully will help you as well to give a few facts to your guests. First time it was mentioned is quite a while ago. It's almost 2,000 years now. First time in 372, it was a monk called Saint-Martin, planted the first vineyards there in the Abbey of Marmoutier. These vineyards don't exist anymore. Having said that, there's still some vineyards there, but the original vineyards have long, long been gone. That's thanks to phylloxera and a few other circumstances. But give or take, it's almost 2,000 years of winemaking. There's a thanks to the church, effectively, we've got some wines in Vouvray. Now, for a long time, when I say long time, for thousands of years, Vouvray wines were actually served at the royal courts and for French kings and queens. And there's a good reason for this. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on this later, but it's incredibly age-worthy wine. So maybe the one, if you ever are having the pleasure of doing a stock take and your accountant will say to you, you really need to sell this Vouvray and we really need to get this going because otherwise it's going to go off. You just can confidently answer that this is not going to happen. Vouvray wines last extremely long. And the main reason for this is there's a little bit of residual sugar always there and there's a naturally high acidity. So these wines are really made for aging. A few other things is 1906, that's quite fast forward now. There's what they call a defense union created, which was effectively sort of the predecessor of the AOP. And the reason why they did that is because naughty French merchants were diluting other wines from the Vouvray appellation and were calling it Vouvray. So the Vouvray producers actually founded this defense union in order to protect the name Vouvray and its origin. So it's, again, more than 100 years old. And so they're quite the foresight actually at that time. So it's fantastic to see that we've got a bit of history there. 1936, another important date, pretty much the first AOC within the Touraine as a region. To put this in perspective, this is as well when literally AOC or AOP started. So now it's called AOP, but back in the days AOC, and you're in the same level as appellations like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which was really the forerunner to it. It's a long, long history there. Tons of good reason to visit Vouvray. There's so many castles. It's very good for cycling. And besides of that, it's UNESCO World Heritage in so many different areas and so many different towns. I just put up one picture, which is very, very close to Vouvray. It's in Tours. It's one of the castles called d'Amboise. And it gives you a bit of an idea. There's a reason, as I mentioned before, why a lot of French kings and queens were drinking Vouvray, and it has a long standing in the royal court. And the main reason for this is because a lot of kings and queens were having castles in the stretch of the Loire Valley. So that's just one example of many, many castles which you find there. Okay, Vouvray is an appellation, a couple of laws and regulations, 1,000-meter long river. The river really makes a difference, climatic-wise, because it regulates and it gives you a good diurnal shift, but it prevents as well frost. Very important, grape varieties mentioned before, Chenin Blanc. A lot of people won't tell you about this, but technically you can blend up to 15% of Arbois, which is a variety predominantly found in the Loire, but really specifically in Vouvray. Now, 95% of the Vouvray which is out there is 100% Chenin Blanc. So there's still a few producers which use a little percentage of Arbois, but it's a good information to have predominantly Chenin, but Arbois is allowed as a blending partner. The Vouvray Classique, which you hopefully have in front of you, that's 100% Chenin Blanc from Marc Brédif. There's a local name for Chenin Blanc, which is called Pinot de la Loire. Big surprise here, the majority of production in Vouvray is actually sparkling. I'm not sure if some of you have tried Vouvray sparkling, but based on Chenin Blanc, traditional method, it's a fantastic style of sparkling wine, really. You don't see a great deal outside of France, really. It's a very, very popular wine within France. And if you speak to any sparkling wine producer or any champagne producer, they will tell you pretty much in order to make good sparkling wine or good champagne, you need acidity. And this is where Chenin Blanc is having it in spades. There's plenty of naturally high acidity. But important to remember, Vouvray 52% is sparkling, actually. And then the styles of the wines, really dry to sweet. It does depend a bit on the vinification and the harvest time, but you do find a whole range of different styles. Around 160 different producers and something like 2,300 hectares across 8 villages. So 8 villages are allowed to contribute and to sort of produce and then label it as Vouvray. And give you a little bit of a perspective as you're going next week to see the big guns with Bordeaux and Burgundy. The total production of Vouvray is around 15 million bottles a year, which does sound a lot initially, but if you compare it to Bordeaux, it's around 500 million bottles for Bordeaux. So slightly larger there, some might say. But yeah, it gives you a bit of an idea. Okay, official styles of Vouvray and then Marc Brédif in specific. So the reason why I give you the official styles is because you will surely see several different styles of Vouvray in your life, and really specifically to tell you how Marc Brédif handles this. So there's 3 official styles. There's sec, which stands for dry, demi-sec for off-dry, and meuleux for sweet. Now, there is 2 numbers worth remembering, which is 9 and 15. 9 under 9 grams for sec, demi-sec 9 to 15 grams, which is a very, very common style. You find very often much more off-dry styles of Vouvray than you find dry styles of Vouvray. And there's a reason for this, is the naturally high acidity needs to be balanced with the residual sugar content. So if you have that good balance, you essentially need a couple of grams of sugar then the finished wine. And meuleux is sweet, at least 15 grams. In total honesty, this is a regulation. Very, very often, it's much higher than that. So when we talk about sweet Vouvray, we talk comfortably about anything between 55 to 120 grams of residual sugar, so significantly sweeter. And Marc Brédif, the style which you see here, which is classic, that's the one you listed to the Levant, which is this dry aromatic fresh style, predominantly in primary aromas. Then you find a collection, a Grand Année, a nectar, and a pétillant. Now, the reason why I tell you this, because every producer will have something slightly different. With Marc Brédif, this is really the core range which you find. And with collection, you have this selection of plots and villages, predominantly 2. The town of Vouvray, it's a bit confusing sometimes in France, and you've got the town and the region, both have sometimes the same name. And Grand Année, as the name slightly suggests, it comes from the best vintages, so it's a vintage-specific Vouvray. You've got nectar, again, the name gives it slightly away. It's a sweeter style. Comes in small, cute little 375 ml bottles. It's quite rare to find, actually. And pétillant, which is effectively just a sparkling traditional method style. So these are the 5 ones which I have. The most common one is the one up front with classic, which you see. This falls really, depending on the vintage, at around 8 to 12 grams for Marc Brédif. So the classic sits sort of regulation-wise between sec and demi-sec, but very, very often is labeled as sec, so as dry style. Okay, gives you a bit of an idea about the cellars there. Didn't talk too much about the cellars and the soil condition, but this gives you a little bit of an idea how wonderful the cellars are. There's a local soil which is called tuffeau, which is sort of a soft chalk. It's quite easy actually to manage to build these cellars, and it's basically, in a nutshell, the best natural refrigerator you can find in the world. So when you go to the cellars, it doesn't matter if it's 40 degrees outside, plus 40 or minus 40 outside, these cellars are pretty much stable at around 10 to 12 degrees. So they're like a perfect, cool, dark environment to store wine. Okay, vineyards, I mentioned this briefly. Tuffeau is the local name of the chalk. Now, a lot of people always talk about periods in time. This is the Turonian period. I actually have a map on the next slide just to give you an idea what the Turonian period was like. But effectively, this specific soil, Tuffeau, is a soft chalk, which is almost 100 million years old. So it has been around for a while. And a couple of things about the vineyards itself. You do find sometimes this term which is called clos, and several different Vouvray appellations and several different Vouvray producers. In general speaking, you have a maritime continental climate. What this effectively means, it's very similar to the British. Sorry, Brits, but it's fairly warm during summer, maybe a tick warmer, and fairly cold during winter. So you've got a good diurnal shift effectively. So you've got a good spread of seasons. You have a proper spring, summer, autumn, and winter. But of course, the maritime influence is predominantly here referring to the rivers and to the main river with the Loire. Organic farming where possible. That's specifically now for Marc Brédif. They're not certified organic. There's a reason for this. Not every French person wants to fill in the paperwork of being certified organic. So we just leave it there. Low yielding, 25 to 45 hectoliters per hectare. To put this a bit in perspective, if you look at Grand Cru Burgundy, the regulation, I believe these days is around 45 hectoliters. So they're very low yielding wines. And in general, Marc Brédif owns old vineyards, 20 to 70-year-old vineyards. So quite the age. Now, this is the Turonian period. If anyone would ever ask you what the world looked like 100 million years ago, Europe as a country didn't exist. Australia was attached to Antarctica. And North America as a continent was as well quite different in the look. So it gives you an idea. The reason why I show you this, because the soil in Vouvray is as old as this. So it's about 100 million years old. So it's quite the time. Okay, who is Marc Brédif? I mentioned 1893 established. It's effectively now owned since the 1980s by a gentleman called Baron Marc Ladoucette. Ladoucette, you may have heard that before because it's a quite well-known name in an area called Pouilly-Fumé. So if you know Pouilly-Fumé, that's the same guy. Ladoucette and Baron de Patrick, they own Marc Brédif. 10th century old cellar, or from the 10th century, quite active in this local tuffeau, the different styles of Vouvray as well. Okay, coming now to the main one which you have. This comes from specifically two villages, which are Vouvray and Vernu-sur-Brenne. But Vouvray here, the name of the appellation, but as well the name of the town. There are different exposures north to south. The reason why I tell it is because south-facing vineyards are generally speaking, especially with climate change and climate crisis and climate warming, quite warm. Where north-facing vineyards are really preferred these days because they generally have a cooler aspect. So for Marc Brédif and for Vouvray Classique, they use north and south exposed vineyards. Mixture of different soils, predominantly soft chalk, but you do find a bit of flint and clay there as well. And then you've got around 25-year-old wines. Everything is hand-picked in this wine. There's no machine which has been used. There's a very gentle pressing. It's a simple clarification, and around 2 months, 70 degrees Celsius fermentation. So it's a pretty normal fermentation temperature, slightly on the cooler side. And if anyone would ask you, they avoid a malolactic conversion or a malolactic fermentation. This is effectively done purposely to preserve the acidity. I'm sure some of you have learned about malolactic conversion or malolactic fermentation, but in a nutshell, it's trying to preserve the naturally high acidity. It's quite common in Champagne and for certain other varieties, but it's specifically done for this wine to keep its freshness and its vivid style. It spends around 9 months on its fine lees in stainless steel. So this is a wine effectively which has never seen an oak barrel. It's really about freshness and beauty here. What does it taste like? It's an important one. If you have it in front of you, I put a few things down. I have to apologize. I didn't find the GIF, which is quince, which is a moving quince. So you're going to have to imagine that. But especially Vouvray and especially classic from Marc Brédif. Doesn't matter too much these days if it's 21 or 22, but I believe he lists 22 as a vintage. There's a very citrusy element there. People normally describe this sort of as a fresh lemon or lemon peel. You find some red apples, which is quite common, and sort of a quince characteristic, a bit of white flowers, then a bit of this note of honey, tick of mushrooms, but this is more like fresh mushrooms, sort of button mushrooms. This develops a bit further when it ages. I personally tried just this year, going back to 1945, and they age really well. There's Vouvrays. Having said that, they become much more secondary and tertiary. So you need to imagine that the fruit is going down, and this sort of mushroomy characteristic and the honey notes and the floral notes are more coming up. It's fantastic. Now, there's one thing which I wrote here. It has naturally high acidity. This is not something which I would really ever say to a guest, but very importantly, I would use other words for this, like crisp, refreshing, or has a vivid freshness. So that's sort of 3 words I normally would use, because if you say to a guest it has naturally high acidity, they most likely look at you and like, it's not two very attractive words, high acidity. But anyway, I normally use it's a crisp, refreshing, or quite a vivid style of a Chenin Blanc. But hopefully, if you taste this, you get 1 or 2 of these 5 descriptors which I've put on here. Now, coming slowly to the end, if you ask how do all these stars align, I was really thinking how I can make this in 20 to 25 minutes attractive for all of you guys. So I looked at 2 Hôtel de Var, quite on the polar opposite side of the country. One in Edinburgh, so quite up north, and one in Wimbledon. Now, Wimbledon, yeah, Wimbledon. So that's the first one which I've put on here. So you find the menu actually from Wimbledon, I think here, which with the stars are those dishes which I can totally imagine working really, really well with Vouvray. And there's a bit of a reason behind that, because as soon as you have a dish which is slightly richer, more full on, which has maybe a certain, when I say rich element, I mean either a certain amount of creaminess, butter, or some fat or some protein. High acidity is really good to cut through that richness and for that intensity. So I picked out a few things which I think would work really well. Now, the first one is fried truffle gnocchi, because gnocchi, you know, they're quite rich. At the same time, truffles has sort of this mushroomy component there. And as I showed before on that slide, Vouvray Chenin Blanc quite often has a bit of this mushroomy thing going on there. And of course, with pasta dishes, it works really well. There's a couple, like the Bongiole, which I picked out, which has this sort of garlic element there, which I think would really nice. But, you know, there's a really good diversity there. A couple of risottos I personally think really good in general is white fish. Doesn't matter too much about the fish, but if you have a sea bass generally works really, really well with Vouvray, you know, because again, sea bass is slightly more meatier fish. You can quite comfortably put something which has a bit of body and richness to it. So I thought like this is good. And then going up north, because I love Scotland and I love whiskey, but in particular Edinburgh as a city, I put the Edinburgh menu there as well. Several different things where I could totally imagine going for this. Personally, maybe the sauté mushrooms, bottom left, would be really, really nice. On the other hand, tiger prawns, again, a bit with this chili garlic component. As soon as you have this naturally high acidity in the wine and this little bit of sweetness which you get in Chenin or Vouvray, this can work really well with dishes which are a little bit hot spicy or warm spicy, because a little bit of residual sugar helps to sort of compensate for the spicy element of the dish. And of course, because I'm Austrian, I'm sure it worked really, really well with schnitzel too. So these are sort of my recommendations, what Vouvray Classic by Marc Brédif is like. And believe it or not, this is it. You know, we are, I think, on 20-ish minutes, Richard, a bit more, 25 maybe. So I think we did relatively well.
Very good.
Questions and an email, should you be too shy of asking any questions, but you can either email me or Ed, but I put my email just on the screen here as well.
Thank you so much indeed, Stefan. Before we wrap up there, are there any questions for Stefan? Could you just clarify for me the residual sugar in the classic Vouvray that we're listing? So
yeah, it's the 2022 right now is 9 grams.
Right, so it's right on the cusp of.
It's right on the cask between dry and off dry.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. You wouldn't have thought it was that much sugar when you taste it.
Yeah, it's the acidity which is just bang on high. I mean, this is like, wine professionals love to talk about acidity, pH, and alcohol. Guests generally are less interested, but the balance is really important. If you have that amount of residual sugar, you need to balance it with some pretty high acid.
Are there any other questions before I wrap up there? Okay, in that case, just want to remind everyone one last time, that brings us to the end of the Loire Valley Week. Thank you very much indeed, Stefan, and all the producers that we spent time with this week. And then Monday at 3 o'clock, same time, I'm hosting the introductory session to Bordeaux. And then following that, we have 4 sessions next week from 4 of our Bordeaux producers, including obviously Chateau Pen, who is our by the glass Bordeaux on the core Hotel de Vanlis. So session every day next week, Monday through to Friday, and hopefully as many of you as possible will join me on Monday to do a summary and a brief look around the Loire Valley, Bordeaux, in the same style of presentation that we did the Loire Valley this week. And Alsace and Burgundy the last few weeks. So I'll stop sharing there. I'll say thank you once again, Stefan. Thank you for everyone joining us on a Friday afternoon. Have a lovely weekend, and I will end the recording there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.